Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa McClenahan, Executive Director and Counsel at the Canadian Environmental Law Association. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Walkerton's Drinking Water Protection Legacy. In this series, we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the contamination of Walkerton's water supply by speaking with the people who experienced the tragedy and the inquiry that followed firsthand. With me today is Ramani Nadarajah, who is Senior Counsel at the Canadian Environmental Law Association and was one of the lawyers representing the concerned Walkerton citizens at the public inquiry digging into the systemic and direct causes of contamination of that town's water supply in the year 2000 to 2001. Ramani is a former prosecutor at the Ministry of the Environment in Ontario. Since then, Ramani has been at the Canadian Environmental Law Association as counsel for over 25 years, representing CELA clients across Ontario. Ramani holds a degree in law from Osgoode Law School, as well as a master's degree in administrative law, also from Osgoode. Ramani, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
So when you were representing the concerned Walkerton citizens at the Walkerton Inquiry following those tragic events of May 2000, when the town's drinking water became contaminated, what were some of the things you focused on?
I was primarily focused on whether government policies, practices, and procedures contributed to the E. coli outbreak. This involved examining the decision-making process of both government ministries and agencies. It also involved examining the legislative, regulatory, and policy framework governing drinking water in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. So why did you think it was important to represent the concerned Walkerton citizens at that inquiry? What value do you think CELA added to the citizens in terms of participating in the inquiry?
I think CELA was uniquely positioned to represent the concerned Walkerton citizens. CELA lawyers had been very carefully following the deregulation of environmental laws that had begun 5 years before the inquiry commenced. And I think that experience and expertise gave us a very clear understanding and appreciation of how the government's decision-making process contributed to the events that led to the E. coli outbreak. I think it was also very helpful for me in terms of my experience of working previously as a lawyer with the Environment Ministry. Mm-hmm. That gave me an understanding of the operational side of the ministry's work.
Right.
So I think a combination of just having that broad policy perspective as well as a detailed understanding of the machinery of government was very useful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, and in terms of being at the inquiry, it was many months long. There were months of getting ready for the inquiry. You and I were part of the team that represented the citizens, and then when there were many months at the inquiry, what are some of the significant recollections you have about what it was like to represent the citizens at the inquiry?
Well, I think my most significant recollection was just the voluminous amount of documents that had to be reviewed at very short notice and preparing for cross-examination of witnesses on very short deadlines. I've been involved in many environmental cases which involved large amounts of documents, but it was at a whole different level at the inquiry. I think just the number of documents that the CELA lawyers had to review was just staggering. Mm-hmm. I also remember meeting with the residents who had been personally affected by the tragic events, and some of whom had lost loved ones. Mm-hmm. Those memories will always stay with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The community had gone through a lot, and I remember them telling us at the outset that they really didn't have any trust in officials at all, or in their water supply more specifically, and that was a big part of the inquiry. I think was getting to a point where the community could trust, both, as you said, the machinery of government as well as the protection of their direct water supply.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the results of the inquiry, we're now 20 years after the tragic events occurred in Walkerton, and as we're recording this, it's 20 years ago this week. What would be one or two of the most significant results of the inquiry? What do you hope we as a society remember going forward?
Well, I think the most significant result was the complete revision of the regulatory framework governing the safety of drinking water in Ontario. There were also, I think, several important laws that were passed following the inquiry's recommendation, including the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. CELA was involved extensively on both those fronts. And of course, backing up the regulatory changes with mandatory inspections and enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In terms of going forward, I think the inquiry provided an important reminder to Ontarians about the critical connection between the need for strong environmental laws and the protection of public health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that that is a lesson we never forget.
Absolutely. I think the Walkerton citizens would join us in that hope as well. And I've often heard them say that they hope that's the legacy as well going forward. This interview is one of a short series titled Walkerton's Drinking Water Protection Legacy, curated by CELA to be housed on the CELA Foundation's environmental history pages. In this series, we focus on the essential lessons learned from one of our significant CELA cases, the Walkerton Inquiry, and how to ensure drinking water protection and environmental protection is safeguarded into the future. Ramani Nadarajah was co-counsel for the concerned Walkerton citizens. Ramani, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Teresa. My pleasure.